Oh, we're just having a good time this morning, chatting and telling old war stories and all kinds of fun stuff. Anyway, welcome to Bible study. And this is the last unit, or the last session rather, of our unit on family relations and how do we navigate family conflict. We left Joseph and his brothers well, somewhat in a lurch. Maybe the brothers weren't so much in a lurch. We left Joseph in a lurch for sure because his brothers sold him into slavery to traveling caravan on their way to Egypt. And what did the brothers get out of it? We're not told whether it was money or whether it was some kind of valuables they traded for. We don't know. But we do know that they lied to their father and told him after they had coated Joseph's coat, his great recognizable garment, after they had coated it with blood of a goat. Why, they did tell the father that, oh, we found this. We don't know what happened. And let Jacob, their father, make his own conclusion. Oh my gosh, my son, my favorite son, he has um, been the demise of wolves or something. And they just left it there. And what happened to Joseph? Well, if you read from Genesis, I believe we started in 37. If you read from 37 on following, um, he went to Egypt. In Egypt, he was sold into the home of Potiphar as a servant. Potiphar was one of the leaders under Pharaoh, and so Potiphar's I've got a problem with my tongue today. Potiphar's wife was had a hankering for Joseph. He was a young man, and I'm sure was probably pretty fit, and so she tried to defile him. He wasn't having anything to do with that or her, and so she made up the lie that he had assaulted her. And what was Potiphar left to do, even though he may not have believed her? Throw him in jail. Well, they threw him in jail and kind of forgot him. And so then one day, but while he was in jail, God showed him favor, and he then kind of became the captain of all the prisoners, which was, kind of cool. And so, well, one day then a baker and um, the cupbearer of Pharaoh came into prison, and they said, well, we have these dreams, and how do we interpret them? And Joseph said, well, he said to the, and I've got them all confused. I didn't reread the story. I should have, but he said one of them, he said, well, you're going to be okay. But the other one, he said, today's your last day. You're in trouble, buddy. And sure enough, that's the way it turned out. And so he said to the one that he had said it was okay to, he said, you're going to be restored to your position. And when you get there, remember me. Tell Pharaoh, hey, I'm down here. I kind of got forgotten. I never really even got a fair trial out of this. Here I am, just sitting here rotten. And so, sure enough, I think it must have been well, I'm not even going to speculate. But when he got up there, forgot all about Joseph until Pharaoh had a dream. Pharaoh had this dream, and it was very puzzling. It was very real to him. And so Pharaoh said, wish I could find somebody to interpret this dream, and all his wise men couldn't do it. And then all of a sudden, the guy who had his dream interpreted positively from Joseph says, oh my, I know a guy. I think he's back there in jail. Let's just go get him and see what he can do. So that's what they did. And Joseph told them what it meant. And Pharaoh was impressed by that. Of course, we know that God's favor was on Joseph all the time. So he was impressed by that. So what does he do? Well, he says, hey, if we're going to have this 7 years of plenty and then we're going to have 7 years of famine, somebody needs to be in charge of this. And so, why don't I make you in charge of it? And so Joseph gets out of prison. He becomes second in command to Pharaoh. He is in charge of the agricultural production over the next 7 years to make sure they produce plenty, that they store up plenty, in order that they and the areas around them will have plenty of food while they go through this famine. So we pick up in chapter 42, I believe it is today, where the famine's already come. Famine's happened, and it went as far as Canaan to the north, where Joseph's family lived. And so they're in the midst of a famine, and what are we going to do? We're out of food. And so Jacob, their father, says, why don't you go down to Egypt? I heard there's food down there. And why don't you go down there, take some money with you, take some stuff, and you can buy it and bring it back. And that way we'll have it. So the 10 brothers left, take off. Didn't take Joseph's younger brother, full brother Benjamin, with them because he's been the only consolation that Jacob, the father, has had since he found out that Joseph was dead. Remember, Joseph and Benjamin were brothers, full blood brothers, out of Rebecca, who was Jacob, their father's favorite wife. She was the one that he really served the father-in-law Laban for in order to marry her. He got stuck with Leah, who was the older sister, who wasn't married. And I say got stuck with her. He took her. He took her as his own, and she bore him children. And Rebecca's womb was closed, and so she didn't have any children, and that kind of built some dissension. They also gave Jacob their handmaids, and so out of that came these children that they had together. So here's Joseph. He's kind of going about his duties, making sure if these people are coming and they're buying grain, they had storage bins where the people of Egypt could come and they could get it. And then if foreigners came in, they would charge them something and they would distribute that to them because they'd prepared and they had plenty. And so here they are doing this when Joseph spies and realizes that group of people that came is his brothers. And he recognizes them. But guess what? He was like 17 when they last saw him. It's several years later, at least 14 that we know of, right? Or probably more because he was in jail a while. Here he is. He's not going to look the same necessarily. Plus, he's going to be kept as an Egyptian. He's going to have on Egyptian garb. He maybe have an Egyptian beard or whatever. So they're not even going to pay any attention to who he is. Probably because they didn't even think or know whether he was still alive or not. I'm sure it haunted them every time they saw the grief of their father because their father Jacob never got over it. He didn't. And so here they are, and Joseph recognizes them, and that's where we pick up today. He has kind of tested them a little bit. He's tricked them a little bit. He's done some things with them, like when they went to leave. He put he asked, leave one of them. He really wanted to know, did they actually have a father? Did they actually have a younger brother? And they knew, I don't know if they just were kind of dumb to the situation, but they didn't really figure out why he was asking that. But okay. And so they went home. They couldn't get, they were afraid they couldn't get Benjamin pried away from the father because he really wanted to protect him. But he was afraid something would happen to him. So that's where we pick up today. Genesis 42, verses 3 through 5 says, so 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to buy grain from Egypt. But Jacob did not send Joseph's brother Benjamin with his brothers, for he thought something might happen to him. The sons of Israel were among those who came to buy grain, for the famine was in the land of Canaan. And so Benjamin didn't go. Well, you can read the whole story from 37 on in the book of Genesis. But one of the things that Joseph did was he said, take Pharaoh's cup and put it in one of their bags where they had the grain that they had bought. And then when they got out of town a little ways, they, hunted them down and said, wait, you guys, what did you do? And they opened up this bag of grain and here's this cup of Pharaoh's. And they're like, whoa, they didn't know that was in there. Well, anyway, he's kind of tricked them, he's kind of done some things along with them. So what does this mean then? Well, it just says to us that here is a crisis that has come in the region. And yet Joseph is going to be aware that God has been preparing and planning for this all along. While his brothers may have made the choice to sell him into slavery and to lie to their father and keep that uh, going for this long, um, Joseph is going to see it as God actually working in their behalf. And so, it even tells us that the brothers didn't necessarily want to go to Egypt. Maybe they had some guilt. Maybe they had some burden. Maybe they were afraid that the father might find out that they had lied to him somehow. But eventually they did go. And then after they'd gone, then and so Joseph, tracked him down. They had the the cup, and so then he said, "Wait a minute here. I'm going to have to keep one of you, but you can go back and get your younger brother and bring him back, and then I'll let you go." Well, they went and they did that, and it didn't go well because the cup was in Benjamin's. I may have gotten the story all screwed up. I don't know, but you're getting the gist of it here. Benjamin was in Benjamin's sack, I guess. Maybe that didn't happen until the second time. Anyway, forgive me. I'm sorry. But anyway, so they couldn't leave Benjamin because what would that do to Jacob, their father? And so they left one of the brothers. And then when they went back, then they all came back without their father. And that was when Joseph began to reveal himself to them, that he was their brother. And so that's where we pick up then in our second passage of scripture. And we go to verse 21 and go through verse 24. It says, "Then they said to each other," this is after they've come back and they're in his presence, and they said to each other, "Obviously we are being punished for what we did to his brother." Do they have a guilt complex? Yeah, they do. We saw his deep distress when he pleaded with us, but he would not listen. That is why this trouble has come to us. So here, while they wouldn't even tell their father the truth, they've carried this guilt with them all this time. So in verse 22, it says, Reuben replied. Now remember, Reuben's the one that came back and said, "Don't kill him," and then they decided to sell him. But, they put him in the pit and don't kill him. Reuben thought to himself, "I'll go back and get him out later." But then when he came back, he wasn't there because they'd sold him. But Reuben says in verse 22, "Didn't I tell you don't harm the boy? But you wouldn't listen. Now we must account for his blood." They did not realize that Joseph understood them, since there was an interpreter between them. And that should say there was an interpreter between them before, so that Joseph kept up the act with them that he didn't understand them, even though he knew exactly what they were talking about, because he not only knew Egyptian, but he knew Hebrew as well. And so it says, what did he do in verse 24? He turned away from them and wept. Why? Because he couldn't take it. Because, his brothers had done a grave injustice to him. And he could have been very revengeful with them, couldn't he? But instead, he understood that God's whole plan was to get to this point. That was part of the dream that he had too. Remember it? We didn't go over it in our lessons, but the dream was that his brothers and even his father would bow down to him. Well, it's coming true, because here they are. He's now the second in command to the Pharaoh in Egypt. Next to Pharaoh, he's like the most important guy. And here they are, and they are going to bow down to him. They are going to give in to whatever he says. So, when he knew what they were talking about, it grieved him. It made him sad. Would you or me? I think some of us might just make downright angry. But it wasn't Joseph. Wasn't the case with him, because he understood what it was to trust God. He understood what it was to be able to put your faith in God, and even when bad things came, if you just write it out, God doesn't forget you. You might even be wasting away somewhere in a jail. It might take a while for God to get you out, but in his perfect timing and in his will, he will get you out and he will move you on in the direction that you need to go to be faithful to him. Okay? So that's where they were. Um, and then we get to the last passage that we read in our lesson today, and that is chapter 45, verses 1 through 5. And I know we skipped through a lot of this. I would encourage you to go read the whole story to get it all down. So here we are. Verse 1, chapter 45. Joseph could no longer keep his composure in front of all his attendants. Now, he didn't want the Egyptians who were helping him deal with them to know what was going on. And he certainly didn't want them to see him in a point of weakness. That's one thing as the authority you never wanted to have happen, was for someone to see you in this point of weakness. But when he couldn't contain it anymore, he sent all of them out, all the Egyptians. He got them out of the room. So it was just him and his brothers. I wonder what those Egyptian people were thinking. How foolish is this of him? He's going to be alone with these guys. And what are they going to do to him? What's going to happen? Well, in the process, what happened was he sent them out, and then it says, he said, send everyone away from me. No one was with him when he revealed his identity to his brothers. Verse 2. But he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard it, and also Pharaoh's household heard it. He couldn't contain it anymore. And this family reunion was like, unlike any other, because he really couldn't wait to just love his brothers, even though they had wronged him. He couldn't wait to do it, and so he just wept so loud that got outside the room. Verse 3: Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still living?" Well, they'd told him that he was, but he just wanted to make sure it was true. And plus, they'd been there a time or two in the meantime. And he just wanted to make sure that something hadn't happened, because he knew his father wasn't a young man. And so he said, "Is my father still living?" They could not answer him because they were terrified in his presence. Can you imagine? Here you've been with this guy. He's dealt with you. You are at his disposal. He has been the authority over you, and he's finding discrepancies in your action that you're not really even guilty of, but he's accusing you of these things, and he's not really taking a major, like he's not killed anybody. He's not, sending anybody away without food. He's taking care of them. He's just, toying with them through this process. And so, can you imagine? They're looking at him like, no way, that can't be. And so he says, "I am Joseph," but they couldn't answer him because they were terrified in his presence. So not only are they trying to figure out if it's really him, but oh my gosh, what's he going to do to them? Then in verse 4, Joseph said to his brothers, "Please come near me." Can you imagine how they kind of had to circle around a little bit and but they did. They did come near him. And he says, he told them again, "I am Joseph, your brother, the one you sold into Egypt." And once he made that fact plain and known, not only has he basically let the cat out of the bag and accused them of what they actually did. They've been in denial with their father, and probably even with Benjamin, all this time. And yet Joseph just pretty much tells it like it is. So then he says in verse 5, "And now don't be grieved or angry with yourselves for selling me here, because God sent me ahead of you to preserve life." And that's really the meat of this, isn't it? Is that God had it all under control. He was working to get them where they needed to be. And what a roundabout way. You and I could never have predicted something like that. It's not like a Hallmark movie. Oh, I watch Hallmark movies with Ellen, and I tell her, "Are you ready for me to tell you what's going to happen?" It's pretty predictable. You know it's going to happen. Rarely are you wrong, right? But here's the deal. In this story, we could have never predicted unless we knew the story, and that's the way it ended up. And so here we are. We get to this place where they they see that God really has taken care of them. We're going to read, well, we're not going to in this setting, but you can read on down the line where even after they went back to Canaan, they got all their family, they settled in the land of Goshen, they came back or down to Egypt, and they settled there and they dwelled there. Even when Jacob died, and Joseph and his brothers took him back to bury him with Joseph's mother, Rebecca. Um, then the brothers still wondered, okay, now that dad's gone, what's he going to do to us? And he had to remind them again and again, I don't have a grudge against you. I'm not holding this against you. What you meant for evil, God used for good. And so that's what we have to deal with, isn't it? We have to know that is truth in the situation. Well, what are you dealing with in your life? Is there something that you're going through? Is there a struggle? Is there something you're trying to get a hold of? Has somebody wronged you? I hope it wasn't your brothers. I hope it was, somebody. Well, I hope it was nobody. But what are we going through in our lives, and how do we work through that? We do it by just trusting in God, doing the right things, making the right choices, and somehow God will honor it. That's the promise of this story, isn't it? So, God bless y'all. Bye bye.